Hello, I'm Cameron, and this is the first of a few short video tutorials on the basics of animating in Blender for Morrowind. To start with, I'm going to discuss shape keys, when and why we use them, and how to add them to your creature mesh before finally briefly touching on animating using them. Shape keys are usually used for fairly subtle animations or changes to your mesh. Taking the example I've got here of the spider daedra, I've used shape keys to add facial animations. You can see, for example, I've got a shape key panel on the right hand side of the screen. Now, to access shape keys, you are usually clicking on your object, going to Data, Object Data Properties, and Shape Keys. Now, for the spider daedra mesh, I've got a shape key here that will allow me to open or close the mouth. Quite helpful for attack and hit animations. I've also got shape keys which control individual eyes of the mesh, which I can use for blinking, for hit and death animations. Now, while traditionally shape keys are used for usually head facial animations, you can use shape keys to animate an entire mesh as opposed to using an armature. You see that with meshes such as the Quama Forager, and I've got an example here which I've made, which is a very basic mesh for the Skyrender lava. This mesh has a series of shape keys which control pretty much every part of the body moving in different directions. For example, I have a shape key which will move the front of the lava up, or the back up, and similarly I've got left, right, curling up in a particular position I might want for an animation, or even things as simple as moving a particular segment forward or backwards to imitate the movement of a maggot. Those shape keys control pretty much every possible movement I could need, and when they are combined into an animation, we get something like this, a series of animations relying solely on shape keys. Now, how do we add shape keys to a model, and how do we animate with them? Well, shape keys are very easy to add to a model. I've got the spider data here, just with the shape keys deleted. To add a new shape key, I'm clicking on the mesh in object mode. I'm going to the Data, Object Data Properties, and I'm going to look for the shape key panel and click Add Shape Key. That adds a basis shape key. That is basically the mesh before any changes have been added to it, and all future shape keys are going to make reference back to this original basis. In short, don't edit your basis, instead edit your shape keys. What do I mean? Well, if I actually wanted to make a shape key, let's say I want to make the middle left eye of this mesh blink. Once the basis shape key has been added, I'll then click and add a new. Now, naming the shape key is helpful just to keep track of it, particularly if you've got a lot of these. I'm going to double click and name this middle left eye, close. Now, to actually change the mesh with this shape key, the starting point is, you can see we've got this shape key highlighted. We want to go to value, which is currently set at 0, and we want to change that to 1. The value represents the effect the shape key is having over the mesh. So a value of 0 is having no effect, a value of 1 is having the maximum possible effect. What that means will become apparent in a minute. To actually edit the mesh for a shape key, I've got this set to 1. I then want to go into edit mode and make the desired changes to the mesh. Make sure that you've got the shape key highlighted rather than basis. The reason being, if basis were highlighted, then all shape keys would be changed, however you're currently going to change the mesh. Instead, I've got middle eye left close here, so let's quickly make those changes. Let's just grab a few vertices. Let's close the eye very, very roughly, just to illustrate the point. Here I've got a quite abysmally closed eye. Now, once you've made those changes, you don't have to do anything to save them. Instead, simply go back to object mode. And now, a value of 1 for the shape key is defined as having this particular effect. Blender is in essence told, once the value of this shape key is 1, this is what this part of the mesh should look like. If I were in object mode now to change the value, you could just click and slide by dragging your mouse along, or you could enter the value manually. If I were to set this to 0, you'll notice the shape key has no effect, and so the eye returns to its position in the basis shape key. If it goes to 1, the maximum possible effect, the eye looks as I've just edited it. Now, you can use edit mode to make these changes, or you can equally use sculpt mode, which is probably a little easier for getting facial animations to look as you want. Now, the benefit of shape keys is that you can have multiple shape keys having an influence on the model at the same time. Let's give an example of that. I've got here the Python, the spider Daedra, and I'm going to look at some shape key animations I've set up. Now, to get to this panel, we want to go into the animation workshop, which is just behind the screen recorder, so I can't see it, but hopefully you can. Then you want to enter into Dope Sheet. If you don't have that, simply click this on the left for editor type and select Dope Sheet under animation. Then there's a specific panel for shape key editors. I've set up a series of different shape keys. Let's look, for example, at the shape key for blinking. Now, the shape key for blinking, you'll notice here I've got a series of shape keys on the left. That's what each of these represent. And each of these is given a value. Now, in this animation, if I simply hit play, what will happen is each frame that goes by, those shape keys are assigned a value. And with blinking, we obviously want multiple eyes to close at various points in time. And so at some points, we want those eyes to be open completely, so the shape key to have a value of 0. At other times, we want those eyes to be closed, so the shape keys have values of 1. Now, if I were to hit play, if you watch the values on the left-hand side as this animation is playing, you'll notice that those values fluctuate, and each shape key is having an effect on the model. As you can see, he is blinking. What's happening is the middle eyes go first. Every shape key has a value of 0 to begin with. Then once we go to frame 5, you can see that I've given the middle eye left and right a value of 1, the maximum possible value. The eyes are closed. And then once we go to the next 5 frames, I've told Blender that the middle eyes should now be open. So those shape keys have a value of 0. But then 5 frames on, we want different eyes to close. So I've given the top right and bottom right eyes a value of 1. So they close, and so on. So in this way, you've got multiple shape keys influencing the model at the same time. Now, animation with shape keys is super easy. Let's make a new animation. You won't have any animation set up, but let's click New Action. I want to delete all of these existing shape keys, and let's say I simply want the mouth to open and the eyes to close. Well, I've got my shape keys set up, and I want everything to start with a value of 0. I want it to be in its default position. To do that, the easiest way is just to click on the value and then click away. That tells Blender that you are assigning this a value of 0 at the frame which is shown. So at 0 frames, everything has a value of 0. No shape keys are having an influence. At 20 frames, I want the mouth to be open. So I'm going to give that a value of 1, and I want all eyes to be closed. So I'm dragging and clicking away, or you could type the values in by typing 1. And then finally, frame 40, I want to go back to the initial position. Now I could manually edit all of these to 0, or I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to Alt-click this particular set of shape key values, Control-C to copy, and then just Control-V to copy and paste at frame 40 where my marker currently is. So all this does is tell Blender that at frame 0, all shape keys have a value of 0. At frame 20, every shape key has a value of 20, and then they return to their initial value. Looks something like this. The eyes close, the mouth opens. Now, that's it by way of shape key animations. Now you'll notice that what's happening in the background is another animation is playing. That's for quite a straightforward reason. If we go to the NLA editor here, which is under Action Editors, Nonlinear Animation, you can see here that I've got, somewhat hard to see, but I've got animations for my control rig, which are up here, and at the same time I've got animations for my shape keys, which are occurring down here. So I've got my animation running in the background, which controls the basic mesh using the armature. Then I've got shape keys animating the facial animations. I've got the frames synced up, so during the frame in which the idle animations are playing, for example, this runs to frame 80. Well, during frame 80, what's happening is, let me just get rid of this. During frame 80, the armature is doing its basic breathing animation, and it's also running the animation for shape keys that I've just put on. Now, one final thing to note for shape keys is you'll notice that I have got a head which is separate from the rest of my mesh, separate from my body. The reason being is this is a skinned mesh, which means that this particular body is attached to an armature, attached to the skeleton you can see here. Morrowind's game engine is unable to cope with meshes which are skinned, which have armatures, as well as shape keys. Now, to get around that, it's fairly straightforward. I recommend you look at the Devourer model from TR Data. But in short, we want to add a empty object, which is just looking at add, and go to empty, plain axes. We want to parent that axis to a particular bone. So if I were to just quickly do this for you, I'm now in modeling mode. I've got the axis selected. I want to go to object. I want to click parent. I want to click the armature, the skeleton, and then the particular bone, and then the bone I want it to be parented to. And then I would separate the head. I would parent that head to this empty object. That way the empty follows the movement of the bone, which would traditionally control this head, which you can see is this bone up here. When that moves, the empty moves, and because the head is parented to the empty, the head moves as well whenever this head bone moves, even though the head isn't actually directly parented to this head bone. That way you can have shape keys on your head, but still use armatures to animate the model. Hope that was clear, and in the next video I'll be discussing animating using armatures and how to add those to your model.